DiverSync is a weekly netcast where we talk about the world of scuba diving, fantastic diving opportunities, and some of the happenings in the underwater world. We also provide tips and discussions about scuba diving and get excited about upcoming dives and adventures. Learn how you can join us on our dives and become part of the program by following DiverSync on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram, or by visiting our website at www.diversync.com.
Hello and welcome to DiverSync, the netcast and podcast for scuba divers. My name is Rich Synowiec, and you are listening to episode 526, recorded in August 7th, 2024, only a month late. I wanted to do one of these every month, and I'm trying to do one of these every month, and I'm trying to get to 2 weeks. But I am so busy trying to be busy that it's unfortunate. And I know that I'm making a lot of big mistakes when it comes to that, but I'm also doing some good things. I'm not saying no to a lot of things. I'm doing a lot of onesies and twosies. We're doing a lot of training. I got into hard because we were looking at June. No one was coming out for open water. No one was coming out to dive. I got into hard. We're actually doing now, starting in July, we started doing Discover Scubas as if it was a resort course. And so we have had really good success. So if you're a scuba educator listening to this, I'm going to tell you I am shocked at how many people come out for a $250 resort course at White Star Quarry and think it's the coolest thing they have ever done. We are absolutely blown away by the amount of people, and we give them two choices. If you want to just breathe underwater, it's $75. If you want to go on a dive after you breathe underwater, it's $250. And we have had almost everyone take the more expensive option because it's way cheaper than the actual course, and they can see what's going on in that. But we have had an unbelievable amount of people. We've done them on the 4th of July weekend. We did it the weekend after that, Women's Dive Day, and then the weekend after that. So it's been really cool to see the people coming out that would normally not be divers, and that's really cool. So the July, though, is when we start getting into shipwreck diving. Now, June in Milwaukee, the end of June, we went to Milwaukee and we did a tech trip, and it was really cool. We did 2 wrecks that were just, we did 1 wreck that was beautiful, and we were supposed to do a second wreck, but it was the first of the blowouts. But we had great deal, good people, good food, good captain, just a really, really good time. And then Munising the next week. Now, Munising was weird in that 6 months ago, I only had 2 spots left. And the day before the trip, the week before the trip, so many people called and canceled that it was pretty much a private trip for 2 customers and my family. Needless to say, a private trip with 2 customers and my family is probably the most relaxing thing I have ever done, especially when we have 6 people that were paying for it. The boat was paid for, the diving was paid for, the lodging was paid for, and I didn't have to worry about where the money was going to come from. And it was just the continuation of the really weird summer. And the excuses were all positive. No one got hurt. Knock on wood, no one ever gets hurt. But knock on wood, the excuses are positive. But the excuses were things like, my grandmother's going to have her 90th birthday and I'm not going to see her for very much longer, so I think I better go out there and do it. So they'd go and take a week on vacation, and they couldn't get the time off to do that charter. Or I forgot that I was signed up for it, was my favorite one. That's happened 5 or 6 times. And it's just weird. So for the most part, though, we had fantastic weather right up until everybody left. Now, the way that the Munising trip is, and Munising, you guys have heard me, if you've been listening to this long-time podcast, gone back 526 episodes, every July for the past 12 years that I've talked about this, we've gone, including COVID. And we've gone up there and did this kind of diving. And we do a dive trip that's a afternoon on Saturday, morning on Sunday. And it was originally set up to be able to get up there on Saturday morning really early and sleep in, or get up there Friday night and still sleep in, and be able to leave work after work. And the only difficult thing was up there it gets dark late, but it's still dark when you're trying to set up a tent. So that's kind of a little bit of a hiccup, but we have lots of extra lights and electricity. And it's someone's house. It's a friend of mine's house that has property way back in the woods. And one year we used to camp on a property that he had up there, but then one year he moved up there and we started camping there. But the whole trip turns into better things. So we had internet, we had grills, we had a Blackstone. We had all these cool things that you could have, and a campfire, and just a really good group of people this time. And what happens on the weekend is that people get up there on Friday. We have a cookout. We have a cookout in the morning. Then we go to the boat. We have a cookout in the evening. And then we sleep in. We go to the boat in the morning. And then the idea is that we'd have an afternoon cookout, and most people go and enjoy what the Upper Peninsula is all about. Well, both of the guys that were the two customers that we had in my family, they had been up there before. They'd done a bunch of trips before. They'd done some other trips and had other trips planned. And they had to work on Monday. So they all bailed out in the afternoon on Sunday. So we had spectacular diving, spectacular weather. Even the bugs weren't even that bad. And then they go and leave and the rain starts falling. But here's how it worked, is I knew that I was going to have a lot of downtime because in my kick for health, I don't need naps as much as I used to. And so the idea was that I was going to go up there with some of the projects. Up to this point, my summer had been a series of 5-minute projects that had added up to hours. So things like I'll give you an example that's the easiest example, is that when I went to Bonaire over Christmas, I needed some bailout bottle rigging. So I took the bailout bottle rigging off of my bailouts that were spares, because I have 2 sets of everything. So I'd taken the bailout rigging off of most of my spare sets. And I never put it back on. It's a 5-minute job, 10-minute job. But I've never been able to allocate having everything there at the same time. So I grabbed the trailer, packed everything into the trailer that we don't normally travel with a trailer, but we trapped everything in a trailer, and I stacked that bad boy to the ceiling with all crates of 5-minute jobs. And so Sunday afternoon, I had not gotten too many of my 5-minute jobs over the course of the weekend. But Sunday afternoon, I knew I was going to have time because everybody had said they were going to go home early, and we were done pretty much at noon. So I had a good evening to be able to start on these 5-minute jobs. So as everybody's taking down their tents and leaving, and my family is all going out, they went frog looking and taking the dogs for a walk and hiking through the woods. I worked on some of my projects. I got through, of the 20 or so projects, I got through 5 of them when the thunderstorm started. And there was a boom that I heard in the air, and I'm like, oh no. And at this time, the last guy was packing up, and I looked right at my wife, and I said, hey, you know what? Let's go ahead and start packing stuff up so it's not all wet. And so we started packing stuff up in the camper. We made alternatives with my friend to stay on their living room floor instead of in our tent, and because it's not set up for guests. And for the most part, we ended up the trip with pouring rain, but everything's still dry, and I got nothing done. So I got some things done. I'm not going to say nothing. I got some things done. But the weather at least held off until we were ready to go home. Next morning, got up, we headed home, got home relatively early, made a few more forays into getting stuff done. And that was the Munising trip. We are going back to Munising, and we go every year in the second weekend of July. And it's a relatively inexpensive trip, so because there's camping. We can make hotel or Airbnb arrangements for you if you want. That's additional. The diving is all relatively shallow. Deepest dive is about 90 feet. The infrastructure is pretty stable. It's one of the places that we don't get weathered out because there's diving to be done. If you're okay with shallow stuff, there's diving to be done even when the weather's not cooperative. And like rough We can dive in the rain. It's a completely enclosed boat, so we can dive in the rain. But it's one of the few places where if you were listening to this and you're not in the Great Lakes area, never done Great Lakes diving, and you're not sure about your own level of diving, I'm going to tell you that it is by far the best trip for anyone to go on, because there's some dives that are really warm compared to the rest of Lake Superior. There's some dives that are not so warm compared to the rest of Lake Superior, but they're all relatively shallow. You can get them. There's one advanced open water dive that you can do with a good briefing. You can do as an open water diver. It's sometimes dark, sometimes not, which is why it makes it advanced, and it is deeper than 60 feet, but barely deeper than 60 feet for the cool stuff to see. But that's the deep dive. And it's a trip that we don't put a whole lot of people in, and so I can give you, and my whole family goes, and most of my family are dive masters and instructors now, or at least that level. So if we have to buddy you up with somebody that you need, we've got that taken care of. But Munising has been by far the best trip for people that have never been up there. Now, that's not the end of July that we've done. So in the middle of July, we do Isle Royale. Now, Isle Royale National Park is considered the best park in North America, the prettiest park in North America now by one of the travel magazines, but it's still the least visited. And for anybody going up there diving, it's also one of the hardest things to do if you don't own your own boat, because you have to do a liveaboard. And there's only one liveaboard charter up there right now. There's going to be 2 next year, but the Isle Royale National Park is the most remote place on the planet. And so when you go up there, we used to have people who couldn't go up there because they couldn't be out of contact with their work and all that. Well, this brings me to the next cool thing, then, the next big thing. Just before the trip, about a week before Munising, I got an offer from Starlink, because I used Starlink down at the quarry, because down there we had really bad service and it just wasn't working for the POS system that we were using. And so I got Starlink down there, and because I got Starlink down there and I've been a long-time customer, they gave me an offer that I couldn't refuse. And they love doing these offers. I have a offer, if you follow us on YouTube, Facebook. I'm sorry, follow Divers Incorporated on Facebook. You follow me on Facebook as far as Rich Synowiec's course director, Rebreather instructor on Facebook. There's a link for a Starlink referral code, and you get a free month and I get a free month, but you also get a discount on the hardware. It doesn't count for what I'm going to tell you about, which I just found out because a couple people reached out and said, hey, we tried it, we couldn't do the mini. So what it was an offer to do the Starlink Mini. Now this thing's the size of a laptop, an old laptop. It's a big heavy thing, but it's the size of a laptop. It fit in an old laptop case, and it is a full Starlink with router in the size of a laptop. And we had this at Isle Royale National Park at its maiden voyage. And it's going to be, it cost me a fortune to test it, and I'm going to include it in the price of the trip next time. But for what it's worth, we had the ability to call, we had the ability to post, we had the ability to surf the internet, we had the ability to check Facebook, we had the ability to do email. Everybody had the ability to, and unfortunately one person found out they had the ability to upload to the cloud. And when I'm paying per gigabyte, we had to have a conversation about turning all of that stuff off, and now it's in my briefing. But the Isle Royale National Park with Wi-Fi turns it into one of the coolest trips you can ever hope to have. And we now have Wi-Fi. We will now have Wi-Fi on every trip that Divers Incorporated sponsors going forward. It's expensive, but it's not awful, and it's not as expensive. And the kicker was I came back, and my roaming charges when I went to, even with Wi-Fi on the boat, my roaming charges in Truck Lagoon and in Guam were $1,150, and so that was just the overcharges of roaming, and so it kind of justifies what I paid for the Starlink in National Park. Now, the Isle Royale trip was supposed to be a recreational trip. I had one guy who signed up for a recreational trip. Learned a couple things about that. In the world, like after the first trip where people were like, hey, go ahead, take my money, I'm not coming. I called this guy and I asked him the same thing. Hey, you're the only guy signed up for this trip right now. No one wants to go recreational. They all want to go technical this year. are you going to be able to go on this trip or am I pushing a bad call? Oh, I'm not going. Well, when were you going to let me know? I was going to let you know in April for a July trip. Not giving me enough time. Well, it turns out that even finding out in March was not enough time to fill the boat. So I ended up getting a couple of last minute signups, thank God. And one guy signed up from Sweden, which was really cool. Another one signed up, gave me a deposit, but didn't show. But the June trip was only 4 people, including me. So it was really cool with the Starlink, with the 4 people, including me. And it was just really a way back relaxed trip, because with the technical stuff, they're 1 or 2 a days. We don't usually do more than 2 dives a day, and very even rarely that much, because they're all really deep. We were doing 250s, we were doing 140s, we were doing 170s. And so you're doing 1 or 2s because you're in one of the most remote places on the planet. And even though you have Starlink, you don't have a Starlink chamber there. So you want to be real careful with how you're diving. And the water was cold, but not awful, but it was super duper clear. And that's another trip that if you're a technical diver wanting to get into Great Lakes, that's another one where we don't normally get blown out. Now, we did get blown out one day. We had days where it was glass. We had 3 days of glass, 1 day of 8 to 10 footers, and then 2 more days of glass. It was the most bizarre trip to go with one of the most bizarre seasons I've ever had. And I'll take it, though, because we had some great diving. And a little bit long getting home. And I had to teach on Saturday when I was home. So I basically got off the boat, came home, I was teaching an open circuit Trimix course. So switched from my Rebreather to my doubles, and then had to go down and start that class. And the best line I have heard in a long time came out of my daughter as I was walking back we're at the quarry at White Star, and I'm walking back across in front of the concession with my doubles on. And they are a lot heavier than I remember them being. Let's put it that way. They're way heavier than my Rebreather, even with everything on and everything hooked up. Way heavier. And as I'm walking by with these monstrosities on my back, and I don't even have a really big Rebreather or doubles, I walk in front of my daughter. My daughter looks at me and my daughter Olivia looks at me. She goes, "Dad?" I said, "Yeah." She goes, "You looks like your price of your trip just went up." And I chuckled because, yeah, it's exactly the thought that I was having is I don't want to teach this anymore, so I'm going to have to raise the price. I'm really good at what I do, and so I've raised the price twice, and it's not deterred everybody from taking it, and I'm really good at that. So I probably won't quit Trimix. But it's a little bit more difficult to do the full Trimix class now that the standards have changed a little bit deeper. But that's another discussion. So anyway, that's our July, and that was kind of what's going on with July. And I think that, we're going back in July of next year for Isle Royale. We're going back in August of next year. We have a full August trip coming up in 3 weeks. And I've also got some really cool August trips that I've already put on the books, a technical weekday charter and another weekend charter for that if you're interested in Alpina and Presqu'île. So those are all cool stuff that's going on. And I'm hoping that weather holds out because the reason I can do all these today is I got blown out today. So, but it happens. There's lots of cool stuff to do. And we do the weekday ones where it's in the afternoon, so we don't have to drive all the way up there and waste a day. So until I talk to you in a little bit, I'm gonna do another episode about August, so I'm way ahead of time. And until next time, we'll see ya.
DiverSync is a cooperation between Divers Incorporated and Divers Media Group. You can download archived past editions worldwide over the internet at DiverSync.com. If you wish to support DiverSync financially, you can find us on Patreon for bonus content, announcements of live performances, product giveaways, and other opportunities to be part of the program. Help us promote our netcast by telling your friends and dive buddies to subscribe to DiverSync on YouTube and Spotify. The opinions that you hear on DiverSync are not necessarily those of any station, website, network, or advertiser. These netcasts are not intended to substitute for professional diver training. Scuba diving does involve risk and should never be attempted without the proper instructions, supervision, and training. Have any questions or comments? We'd love to hear from you. We are on Facebook and Instagram for messages, or you can email us via our website at diversync.com.